Howdy there. My name is John Doe. I am a graduate from Full Sail University. I have a bachelor's of game design, and graduated back in 2022 with 3.5 GPA. Yay, pretty good, I think. Um, so I guess I'm gonna get in. Felt kind of self-centered, didn't it? It felt kind of self-centered. So like I was selling myself. Now, in fairness, I've recorded this like way too many times. So I'm trying to like keep a little script in my head, but it makes it sound like I'm flaunting. So I'm trying not to. I apologize. We're going to get into what this is and why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I recently moved from a very rural state where I had full health coverage from the state for my disorder to a new state where I don't have any coverage and I don't have access to the same psychological resources I did over there. So in trade, this is it. This is my rubber ducking, my therapy, okay? That being said, I guess I should get a bit about my background here. I personally, about me, I just told you about my degree. I love everything technology and science related, love astrology, and I don't know. I just find science and statistics and all so interesting. I am kind of just that way. In terms of career, don't have one right now. I just moved. Okay, I just moved over here. But beforehand, I had a few diverse jobs. I did dispatching for private security. I was a home healthcare aide for a very short while before I totaled my car. That was fun. That's a story for another time. And I even did 8 months in the U.S. Army. 8 months, yeah, that's a whole, not even like half of shortest contract. We'll get into the story of how that unfolded. I promise I'm not just a shitbag. There was reasons behind it, and maybe you'll kind of see those reasons pretty quickly as I get into this. So back in 2024, actually, so a little over a year ago, it's 2025 right now as I record this. A little over a year ago, I finally sought help for some problems I was having. My primary complaints were of hallucinations, insomnia, things like that. And through a bit of talking, we eventually came to the conclusion, the running diagnosis of most likely bipolar 1 with psychotic features. Through future interventions, both in a psych ward and with another psychologist and doctor, the running diagnosis of bipolar 1 psychotic features has continued. In terms of my medical history with it in my family, my mother has schizophrenia, and my uncle on my mother's side has paranoid schizophrenia. My father, no clue. He never would have told us even if he had a diagnosis or had problems. He was not one of those kind of people he would have told us. So we don't know anything about my father's side. But in terms of my mother's side, that is where we're at. So it ain't too off the beaten path that I'm having such issues concerning my family line. My sister has similar issues, but she's never been officially diagnosed. She'll never go to a doctor to get diagnosed. So who knows what's wrong with her, right? She does what she does. No offense to her if she ever watches this, but just saying. Yeah, I was having some of those issues, and they ran with the diagnosis of bipolar 1 with psychotic features. So for those of you who don't really know what bipolar 1 is, bipolar disorder kind of works on a spectrum in the grand scheme of things. But generally speaking, there's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. So I don't like to say lesser and worse version, but in terms of how they present, bipolar 2 is typically a cycle of depression. So you have your neutral times where you're just perfectly normal, and then you'll go into episodes of varying lengths of depression, and you'll come back up to normal and back into depression. And there's never really a reason, like a specific factor triggering these depressions. It's just there. It just happens. Okay? And bipolar 2 can see a slight increase in mood at the highs, but typically nothing notable. Now, bipolar 1 is a bit different. So bipolar 1, as the word describes, well, it's used to be called manic depressive disorder, is because there is now extreme highs and extreme lows. So during these extreme lows, depression, right? And most people have at least experienced depression once in their life. You can probably understand what that entails, okay, and some of the problems that can come from that, especially with the more severe cases. In terms of high, this is where it gets a little harder to relate to people on. So imagine that you've done meth, I guess is all I can say about it. Like you feel like you're God, and it's these really extreme highs where your brain's running 1,000 miles an hour at all times, and you have these profound ideas that you think are just like revolutionary and they are going to change the world, and you'll participate in more risky behaviors, and there's a whole slew of symptoms that come with that. But racing of the mind is a really big one that ends up occurring, and is kind of how we can help identify that it's actually a high, even if it's presenting sometimes with depressive symptoms, is because the mind will race. That is a guaranteed part of it, at least to my understanding of the disorder. I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you. I just know based on my experiences and based on what I've been told. Typically, if you ever enter a manic episode, which is brought on by an extreme high, is when you'll then get the diagnosis of bipolar 1, even if you were previously bipolar 2. And then in the future, the running diagnosis will always be bipolar 1, because there's always the chance it could reoccur. Again, this is just based on what I've heard. I'm not a doctor. The psychotic features part. So I would just explain to you the mood disorder portion of this. The psychotic features part is a little bit different and a little bit more unique and not all that common. So in terms of bipolar disorder, bipolar 2 is definitely the most common, and then there's bipolar 1, which is less common, and then tacking that on to even less common is the psychotic features. So psychotic features just means you're presenting with psychotic traits along with the disorder. So typically in the form of hallucinations. For me personally, it's visual or audible hallucinations is my biggest problems. And we'll get into that in just a second. So now that we've kind of explained what the disorder is, let's talk about me and how it affects me. Typically with the disorder, there's a cycle, and it can vary in length sometimes, but usually it's a repeated cycle over and over and over again without any real rhyme or reason as to what is happening and when it's happening. Right now I'm definitely in a low portion, okay? I'm in the depressive side of things, and I would call it kind of moderately severe depression. When I was younger, before I got this diagnosis, they had originally diagnosed me with depression, and that was when I understood the scales of that and what that looked like for the different parts of depression. So that's why I'm trying to reference those scales for those of you who understand it. But, with a low, for me, comes kind of a slew of things. Your brain slows way down, and it becomes much harder to do basic tasks, especially depending on how severe the depression is. So we're talking no motivation, staying in bed all day, sleeping 12, 13 hours, foregoing hygiene, basic hygiene necessities, and struggling to just roll out of bed and start your day or know to where even begin. And then on top of that, usually a bit of airheadedness for me, of my brain's going so slow, I'm finding it hard to remember what I'm doing, to concentrate on whatever the task is at hand, to actually do something productive. It's very difficult for me during those times. During my highs, especially my manic highs, it's kind of the exact opposite. During these times, it's called racing of the mind. Your brain is going very, very, very fast, and I find that it's, just as equally hard to take in information because I'm absorbing so much info around me that I'm having a hard time processing it thoroughly. So you can tell me something and I will still forget, just like one of my lows, but now that's because I'm on to topic 3003 when you told me whatever 10 seconds ago, and that was topic 2008, right? It's just kind of part of how the brain gets going. And usually for me, that sees a huge amount of insomnia. That was one of my chief complaints when I originally went in trying to get help, was the insomnia. Because when your brain's just going and won't shut up, it's hard to sleep. And when you can sleep, it's usually not for long. It's 3 to 4 hours, and you wake up and you're ready to go, like you just slept a entire day and you're just ready to go and chase down the world and everything else. I also find that it's a godly thought process. For you, you feel like God. You feel like you are above, at least in my instance, anything and everything. You feel like you have the answers to all the world's problems, that you could solve world hunger right now, today. And you come up with very silly thoughts. I don't know why I keep saying you. I come up with really silly thoughts and ideas that sound like wonderful things, and I have to act on it right now. A good example of this that happened to me, one of my friends, I was explaining to him a story that's kind of passed around about how a manic episode can sometimes look. And the story goes that there was an American, this was back, I think in the 90s, maybe, don't quote me on it. It was during the Cold War era. And the Cold War was not the 90s, dude. What am I thinking? All right, anyway, I forget when the Cold War was. Okay, I swear I've studied this, all right? I just forget right now. But the story goes that this guy, he thought he could end the Cold War by getting racehorses from the Soviet Union, bringing them back to America, showing America how good these horses are. But since the Soviets and him would both love, and the Americans would both love these horses, it would bring unification, and now the Cold War will end. Makes no sense, right? But when you're in a manic episode, it makes perfect sense. It's just that basic thought process. You ain't really applying any logic to it. It's just what makes sense. So I explained to him this story, and about a week later, I ended up entering into one of my manic highs. And I had become convinced the best way to fight inflation in America was to transfer all of my savings to Chinese currency. And so that's what I did. Made really no sense, right? I don't understand the logic I was applying when looking back at it. But at the time, I was convinced this was how we solve inflation in America. And I was so convinced that I was trying to convince my friends and family to do the same thing. And of course, my friend instantly called me out and was like, this sounds exactly like this manic thing you just told me about a week ago. And I was like, you're wrong, dude. No, it's nothing like that. It can't be like that. I know I'm right. I got the answers to this. Again, you sound so narcissistic, right? I sounded horribly misinformed, like I was an elementary student. I don't understand how I got to that point. And I don't know, maybe I should talk to an economist and it was a good idea. I don't know, I don't think so, because I don't see everybody else doing it. But it was just what hit my head. And at that time, it's what made sense to me. So that's what I did. And, that's kind of how my manic highs look. It's very weird, spontaneous, and kind of what's notable for a lot of people, I feel, and for me, is a lot of those around you are going to notice that you are having these issues before you do. They're going to notice that you're in this different phase than you normally are, or than where you were, before you ever realize that this is happening to you. And it's very frustrating to you, because people trying to give you reason, especially when you're at these really high highs and really low lows, it's just talking to a brick wall. There's nothing they can say or do that's going to make sense to you. And for you, it is whatever you're thinking and doing is the correct answer. Okay. With that, then comes the psychotic features. For me, that, as I said, is visual and audible hallucinations. On the visual side, I find they lack much detail, but they I refer to my hallucinations as frequencies, and the frequency varies. Typically, the frequency of my hallucinations are much higher when I'm at my lows than when I'm at my highs. Now, whether that's actually true, I don't know. There's also a chance that I simply notice them more at my lows because my brain's running slower and now it's more significant to me than when I'm at my highs and I'm able to just go on to the next subject in my head 2 seconds later and I don't think about it. So I don't actually know if that's true. I need to like write it down each time it happens to really observe that, and I don't have the patience for that. A chief visual hallucination I have is Ted. I've named him Ted. I named him Ted because of the comedy Ted by Seth MacFarlane. It's just a name that sticks in my head, so it's the name I named him. Trust me, he is not a funny character at all. Not my Ted, anyway. My Ted is, for lack of better words, he's a little bit of an asshole to me. He's very aggressive at times. So Ted, I have drawings of him, I just don't feel like dragging him out of my closet right now. He's a humanoid figure. If you could imagine taking a pencil and just scribbling out a humanoid figure with no features, just scribbling out the basic silhouette of a humanoid, that is him. I assume it's a him. I don't know. I can't see any details that tell me otherwise. So since I'm a guy, I'm going to assign him as a guy because he's a figment of my imagination. So maybe he's a guy too. His biggest trait is he likes to kind of stare at me. He likes to stand from a distance and just watch. And he's never there for long, but he's always there long enough to make sure I notice him before he just poof, gone into thin air. He's definitely my hardest hallucination to deal with because there's times he gets very aggressive with me. Very, very irregularly, he will move in front of me, right? There's plenty of times I look at him and he's in a different position and a different distance from me, but every once in a while he will move while I'm looking at him, and that's how he catches my attention. And I don't understand the science behind how a brain does this with hallucinations, but like a notable time I was at work, and this time I was working at a gas station. I've worked oodles of jobs, okay, blue collar and white collar, and I was at the gas station. I worked third shift, so I was alone at night, and I forget what I was doing. I think I was playing on my phone or something, but I was looking at the back wall, organizing tobacco, I think, and all of a sudden, he's there. Like, I see him running at me, and I look over, and he gets about this close to my face, and then poof, gone. Now, it's not often my hallucinations make me react, because I'm aware they can't hurt me. They are just hallucinations. But that one made me react. That made me jump a bit. I immediately gasped and jumped back. I was like, what in the world was that? That was a first for me. And he does get more aggressive at times to where he starts doing these things that just screw with me. And I don't know how healthy it is to assign a hallucination a whole personality and all, but when it's so frequent and you can kind of pick out traits that it seems to be exhibiting, it's just more comforting to personify them into having a name and a personality. And, I can't really talk to him. At least I don't think he talks back to me. We'll get into the auditory hallucinations in a minute, but I don't think it's ever him talking to me. But he shows his thoughts and his attitudes towards me in how he moves and how he behaves towards me. And yeah, it can be very I don't even know the word for it, but disarming. Maybe that's not a word for it. It's kind of the opposite of disarming. It can be very alerting to you to have this occur. Other visual hallucinations that I don't really have a name for, but they happen a lot. Two in particular. First off, animals. When I'm driving, animals love to just scurry out in front of me. Not real animals. Again, they are black silhouettes of animals. I don't know why my brain picks black silhouettes for everything, but it does most of the time. And that usually will get me to stomp on my brakes a little bit, because I have a hard time realizing, is there actually something in the road scurrying across or not? And it ain't till I get really close that I can notice that it's not real, that I'm just hallucinating. And that's one of the symptoms that's harder to hide from people when they're in your car, because they want to know why you just hit your brakes, and you're like, don't worry about it, question mark? Like, they can obviously tell that was weird, something was weird there. Funny tangent here. Actually, my mother, she has schizophrenia, and she had very similar problems with my dad. So she would hallucinate people in the road, and she would hurry up and stomp on her brakes thinking she's about to hit somebody. And every time my dad would scream, because I go little force because I'm almost confident it's a hallucination. Hopefully that don't bite me one day. But she would go full force stomp on that brake, and then he would scream and be like, "What are you doing?" And she'd be like, "Oh, I thought there was somebody there," and just keep going. Just making her look like a nut, right? And I can think about my passengers whenever I do that stuff, of what they must think. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to die because this guy's going to hallucinate an animal and drive us off the road," right? Just a funny little thought for you there. At least I find it funny. Anyway, and the other sort of visual hallucination I have had happen a few times is very realistic people. Almost never a face, but all the other details are there. Clothing, a gender, things like that. And sometimes it's reoccurring. One time it was a reoccurring hallucination of a tall, slim guy. Right, he wasn't really slim. He was more on the medium-built side. Not muscular, but kind of chubby. And he was wearing a blue sweatshirt. I don't know what he was wearing on pants. I think maybe black pants if I had to guess, but I didn't really look down there. I just would notice there's this guy with no head, just vibing, just chilling, just standing there. And I would stare, and he would poof. And like, okay, that was weird. There's other times I have a harder time deciphering that it was a hallucination, because it's very convincing. Good example is when I worked in security. I had watched on security cameras a woman I was talking to turn around and walk out the front door, and the door automatically locks. There's no way to come back in once you go out it without us letting you in, only to then turn around a couple of moments later, and she was still sitting in the lobby the entire time. And I checked cameras. She had never moved. She had been there the entire time, but I saw with certainty her leave that door, and it was extremely alarming to me. This was actually before I had my official diagnosis, because I didn't know what just happened. I was like, what? I know I just seen her leave. What just happened here? And I was convinced of it. I was convinced it happened. And I tried so hard to prove it to myself, but I had to surrender and be like, I hallucinated it. Oops. And it's hard to explain to my coworkers that, because how do you tell them that this didn't happen and you just hallucinated that without really knowing why you're hallucinating? That's a hard topic to address, especially with a coworker. Another time was when I was at my gas station. I was sitting on my phone in the back office, just kind of twiddling my thumbs, playing on it. There wasn't really nothing to do. The store was caught up, and there was no customers. And a customer had walked in and went towards the back aisle. And I'd sat and waited, I was staring at the front register, waiting for them to come back, and they just never did. And I was like, what in the world is going on? Because I can see the front door. I know they didn't exit. So where did they go? Did they go to the bathroom? Where are they? Are they in the back freezer? So I stand up. I'm looking around. No one. There's nobody. I go check the bathrooms. There's nobody there. I go check the back freezer. There's nobody there either. And then it clicked in my head. The alarm never went off. The door alarm that activates every time the door is opened or closed never went off. Nobody actually ever came in, but I seen with certainty somebody come in. So that's an example of one of those times where I could not decipher that I was hallucinating, and it took me a lot of observing to understand and realize that that was a hallucination. And I did go check the security cameras again, and Never happened. Nobody came in during the time that I seen it. But I saw it with certainty happen. And again, that's very, very frustrating. Because how do you explain to somebody that this is what just happened and this is why you're now acting weird? Because you're trying to respond to this hallucination that wasn't there. It was weird. I don't know. In terms of my other kind of hallucination, auditory hallucinations, those kind of take two forms right now. Those are command hallucinations or voices. You know, those are kind of one and the same, but let me explain the difference. So during command hallucinations, almost exclusively happens during one of my major depressions when it's really, really low. And it's typically, if you don't know the nature of command hallucinations, I don't think I'm allowed to say it on YouTube here, but they're very self-harming in nature or harming to others in nature and very degrading and paranoid. So typically it's voices repeating over and over and over again what you should do to yourself or what you should do to this person. And you can kind of draw the conclusions on my vagueness there. Or kind of feeding you info that just don't make sense, but it makes sense to you. One example, this is when I went into a psychosis and went into the psych ward very shortly following this incident. I had gotten my audible hallucinations had gotten so bad that they had repeatedly informed me and told me that people wanted to turn me into the police, that everybody around me was watching me and collecting data so they could put me in jail forever. That was, it ain't like I'm doing anything illegal. I'm working at a gas station, right? I'm just doing my everyday Joe job. And it was bizarre. It was strange. And in trade, I treated my friends and my family like trash because I was convinced they were out to get me. And it was very, very difficult. In terms of what those voices sound like, I want to say they err on the side of female, but they're kind of at the same time. I want you to imagine you're staying in the middle of a football stadium, or whatever stadium you so desire, okay? And that all the seats are full, and everybody is whispering, a loud whisper, okay? One of those whispers that are totally noticeable, but, they're still doing it just for the sake of it, I guess, but in that they are all speaking at the same time one sentence. And now try to tell me what gender that is. That's how the voices sound to me. I don't know what gender it is. I couldn't tell you what direction it's coming from. I couldn't tell you, any characteristic about that voice. Just that what it's saying, okay? Because if I try to describe it any further, it's just not going to make sense. It doesn't make any logical sense. And the other one I struggle with is voices in general, not command hallucinations, just regular voices. This is kind of a two-parter. So that can either take place in the form of music, okay? Usually classical music, so like Beethoven or even Minecraft music. That's a common one for me for some reason. I hear Minecraft music. And again, I can't pinpoint a direction. I can't really tell you how loud it is. I just hear it. It's there. And I have a hard time knowing if that's real or fake. I'll have to ask somebody around me. This is when it's nice to have somebody around you. I will ask them, are you hearing this X thing? And if they say no, then I know that most likely I'm hallucinating right now. And of course, if they say yes, I'm like, okay, sweet. I'm not going crazy right this moment. And then it can be conversations. So a good example of this is I was with my sister going to a con in Ohio, and we were going to an anime con. Anime cons are awesome, by the way. Love them. Anyway, multiple times I had to stop and look at her and ask, are you speaking to me right now? And that sounds like such a bizarre question, right? Why would you have to stop and ask that? But for me, I was hearing what sounded like a voice speaking, again, in a loud whisper, like under its breath, just mumbling something. And I couldn't figure out what. And I couldn't tell if my sister was mumbling to herself or if that was hallucination. And the first couple of times, I was almost convinced she has to be screwing with me. Like, there's no way I'm hearing this, right? And eventually, I stopped asking her, just hurry up and look over at her mouth to see, is her mouth moving? And no, it wasn't. She was being truthful. Every time I'd have to stop and ask her, and she would say, I haven't said anything at all. I don't know what you're talking about. She wasn't lying. She was being truthful. She never said a word. But for me, I thought it was her. I could hear these voices. They were saying something. I just don't know what. And I had associated it with a female voice, I guess, which is why I say maybe they err on the side of female. I don't know, but it's what I heard. And again, I try to go great lengths to hide the true extent of what's happening to me with my disorder from those around me. I don't like to worry people. I don't want people to think I'm not capable of being normal. I don't want people to doubt my judgment. But there is times where I have no control, to the point I have to ask somebody if what I'm experiencing is real. And, you know, when all of these things start combining into one another, again, for the most part, most of this happens at my low lows, right? Every once in a while, they happen at my manic highs that I notice them, but most of the time it's at my low lows. And I eventually have to, you know, ground myself. I have to find somebody or something that can confirm or deny that it's happening. I guess a method I could use, especially with my visual hallucinations, is phone, you know, record or just look at my camera and see if it's there. But the visual hallucinations are usually really sudden onset and fast and end just as suddenly. So I don't really have time to think about doing that. It ain't really what comes to my head as much as I am. Sorry, I need some water soon. As much as I am just trying to pay attention to what it's doing. Oh gosh, I'm already at 32 minutes. I'm trying to keep this under 40, so we're going to wrap this up soon. But that's kind of the symptoms I struggle with. And of course, with the mood disorder part of it, the bipolar 1 part of it specifically, that in itself is a struggle. Because now I'm going from being the life of a party, you know, being able to conversate with 100 different people and maintain a huge group of friends, to repeatedly having periods of not talking to anybody, to sleeping all day, to just not being able to handle myself in any social situation. And as soon as I'm in one, I start to panic and I start to struggle because my brain's moving so slow. I know the second somebody comes up to me and starts talking, I'm screwed. Like, I'm not going to be able to make rational responses and conversations with them because I'm in this really bad spot in my head, and it's, you know, all I can think about, and I'm not really connecting with the outside world. And overall, the premise of this is that it's frustrating and lonely, okay? In terms of frustrating, it's very, very frustrating having these symptoms, not being able to stop it without medication, and even then those medication causes side effects of their own that's really hard to cope with. And it's very frustrating to sometimes not be able to decipher what is real and what is fiction without the help of somebody else or something else. And it's frustrating putting that burden on others around you. And maybe I'm just paranoid, but I feel like it makes people around me doubt my decisions, doubt who I am or what I can do. And without a doubt, as I've gotten older, the symptoms have gotten worse. And because of that, a lot of the things I could previously do when I was younger are no longer a thing. You know, I used to be able to sit down for weeks on end and continue a programming project, but I haven't done that in at least a couple of years now because the symptoms are so severe and my cycle is about 6 to 8 weeks long that inevitably I just lose motivation or lose interest. And by the time I come back, I'm so lost on where I was because I programmed most of it during a manic episode where everything I wrote made no sense at all, that, you know, it's so frustrating because now you can't pick up where you left off and you have to kind of pick up the rubble. And I've tried before to just work around my neutral periods where this ain't happening, but those neutral periods are usually so short-lived, and I can't really tell when they're ending because everybody else around me notices before I do that it's just an endless cycle of frustration. And then the hallucinations on top of it are extra frustrating. I don't want to be a burden to others. I don't want others to worry about me, but there's times where I just can't help it, that I can't control what's going on, and it's so frustrating to me. A good example is when I went into a psychosis. I'm not going into the details right now because I don't got much time left, but it was very, very frustrating to be in that alternate reality, and nobody comprehended what I was going through, what I was doing, what I was saying. Nobody could comprehend why I was acting the way I was acting, but for me it all made sense, and I knew if I tried to say it, they would just call me crazy and dismiss me, or at least that's what I felt or what I thought and feared. And eventually it took me finally saying something for somebody to be like, he needs help and he needs it now because he's on a really bad path at this moment. So something bad is going to happen if we don't intervene. And of course I got sent to a psychiatric hospital where they immediately put me on medication, on Seroquel specifically, to bring me out of those horrendous thoughts and those command hallucinations and just where I was. And the other part of this, besides frustration, is loneliness. There is not many people with bipolar disorder, and a very good chunk of those are bipolar 2 disorder. And while they can relate to the depression, most of them don't have the psychotic features part with it. And they can only relate to half of my problems, because then they can't relate to this godly feeling I have. They don't know what that is. They don't know what that feels like. They don't know the extreme elation you feel. And it's so lonely. It really is so lonely to have these symptoms, have these problems, and just have no one that can understand it. I can sit and try to explain it all day, every day, till I'm blue in the face, but is the only person who gets even close to understanding was my therapist I had, who had bipolar 2 disorder, and she was on medication for it, so she could at least relate to depression. And for my mother, with her schizophrenia, she could relate to my psychotic features part of these hallucinations and how very irritating and frustrating they can get. But it is a lonely existence. It is lonely. Imagine you're on an island and your whole wardrobe is red and everybody else's is blue, and nobody will sell you a blue wardrobe, so you're stuck with red. And then tell me you're not going to, even though everybody else around you can still communicate with you, feel lonely. Like you're not going to feel like an outcast. And that's kind of how I feel. I ain't meaning to be like pity party me, right? I mean like poor me. That ain't what I'm getting at. I'm just saying that it is a lonely existence to not have anybody else around that knows what you're going through and can help you with those symptoms. And of course, doctors can only do so much. They can only help you so much. At the end of the day, it's on you to try to figure this out and try to figure out what best copes with it. So that's the moral of today's story, the moral of this video. And that's pretty much what you need to know about me, and where I am with bipolar 1 disorder. I'm not going to reveal my true name. I'm not going to reveal where I live. And I'm not going to reveal any of my aliases that I go by, because I don't really want friends and family and all to stumble upon these, and maybe it's my paranoia. I always feel like people are going to use it against me, or think I'm trying to get attention, because that's not the point. Ain't even the point of this. I don't want people to watch it. I don't expect them to. I think this would be horribly boring to listen to myself, but it just gives me something to talk to and to go back and account at myself. And, I'm out of depression right now, so I have people around me, friends and family that love me and cherish me, but, it don't always feel that way. And it's not their fault. They're doing all they can to help, but, it's the disorder. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes, of it's all in your head, that it's not true. and that these thoughts and feelings are not what they seem. Yeah, that's about it. We're about the 40-minute mark, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for watching. If you listened to this whole thing, I apologize. I think it was horribly boring, but if you found entertainment in it, great, sweet, thanks. I hope I dress nicely for the occasion. I try to keep my outward appearance formal when I'm going out, unless I'm just running to the 7-Eleven, then I'll keep my street clothes on. But otherwise, this is my uniform that I wear, and yeah, that's me. That's me in a nutshell. What I'm dealing with. Yeah. Have a good day, good night, whatever time it is. Also, just P.S. This background that is maybe totally AI generated, love it. It is a beautiful background, and like the light works perfectly that I have in my room for it, so it kind of gives the sort of morning glow effect, I think. I don't know. I like it. I think it's cool. Anyway, thanks for listening. See you in the next one.